Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And greetings to everyone on Zoom and in the room. My name is Adrienne Petty. Welcome to the Historic Preservation, Property Rights, and Landscapes panel. I'm an associate professor of history here at William & Mary, and I'm really delighted to be a part of this panel, if only as the moderator, because I'm really excited about all of the presenters and papers we're going to hear today. So I'm going to hurry up and introduce them so that we can get moving. Kelley Lemon, who will be joining us virtually, is a licensed landscape architect and assistant professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her teaching and scholarship build on community-engaged landscape and architecture design practices with emphasis on historical and contemporary productive landscapes, neighborhoods, food, mental behavioral health, and well-being in the built environment. Next, we'll have LaToya Gray Sparks, who is a graduate student in urban and regional planning at the Wilder School at Virginia Commonwealth University. Her research interests include urban history, historic preservation, housing policy, and geographic information systems. In 2020, LaToya received international recognition for her story map titled Planned Destruction, which outlines the history of urban planning on Black residents in Richmond, Virginia. LaToya served as an advisory council member of Richmond 300 and currently serves as a board member of the North American Cartographic Information Society and a policy advisory committee member of Housing Opportunities Made Equal. She is currently interning as an assistant historian at the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, where she is working on projects that would increase the number of Black historic landmarks recognized in the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places. Aysha Ames is a descendant of Ignatius Nace Butler Jr., an enslaved person at Georgetown College. She is also a lawyer, scholar, and a teacher. She is currently the director of legal writing at Fordham Law School, where she teaches the 1L legal writing course and helps develop the 1L in advanced legal writing curricula. Prior to teaching legal writing, she served as an attorney with the United States Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, where she worked to ensure equal access to education and to resolve complaints of discrimination. She is a graduate of Rutgers University School of Law, Rutgers University Graduate School of Education, and Rutgers College. And Rachael Finch is the Senior Director of Preservation, Education, and Advocacy for the Heritage Foundation of Williamson County. In her role, she leads all preservation, education, and advocacy initiatives. Finch holds an MA in public history with emphases on historic preservation, cultural resource management, and administration of historical organizations from Middle Tennessee State University. Rachel, I need to talk to you because Williamson County is in Tennessee, and I've done research there, and a BA in history and political science from Metropolitan State University in Denver, Colorado. She appeared in several award-winning documentaries, including The American South as We Know It, Desperate Days, The Last Hope for the Confederacy, and soon to be released Duality, a collection of Afro-Indigenous perspectives. Finch currently sits on the boards of the Tennessee Preservation Trust, the Slave Dwelling Project, the advisory board of the African American Heritage Society of Williamson County, and the Franklin Equity Justice Coalition. These are some impressive women, so please join me in welcoming them, and let's gear up for a wonderful presentation. And Dr. Lemon, you're first.
Thank you, Dr. Petty. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. I am going to share my screen. And then let me know if you can see this. Does that show up okay? You're seeing the first page title?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm really excited to share a project that I've started working on. It's really close to home. As Dr. Petty mentioned, my name is Kelley Lemon. I am an assistant professor, a licensed landscape architect, and an architect. So what you'll be seeing today is a lot of design work, design drawings, mappings, histories. And I'm really excited to share that with you today. The project is Connections Across the Black Agricultural Landscape. And let's see, we go to the next one. My project aims to examine the rural landscapes of the remaining Black specialty farmers across the state of Illinois, documenting their histories from the stories to soils and the foods they produce. And so again, this is part of a larger project, and those larger project goals that I have are documenting the rural landscapes in the state of Illinois through the lens of the Black specialty farmer, capturing those stories of Black specialty farmers through interviews and surveys, and curating a collection of recipes containing foods grown and collected from participatory farms across the state of Illinois and through archival research. So in summary, this is actually going to be a book. It's going to be a cookbook that integrates foods and stories of the remaining farmers in the state of Illinois. And as a landscape architect and a designer, integrating landscape through a series of mappings, beautiful mappings across the state. So as a person that's grown up and lived most of my life in the state of Illinois, that's why this is very personal. And so some of the research methods that I want to show with you, it's a series of mixed methods, including surveys and interviews, observational techniques, mapping techniques, and archival research. The part that I plan to focus on today are the mapping techniques and archival research. And that's through mostly the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, GIS data, and Google Earth imagery with Adobe Photoshop. And so I wanted to start a little bit of the project background. And my project timeline is spanning from the 1920s to present day, so contemporary farms and farmers. But I can't do this presentation without talking about how African Americans had gotten to the state of Illinois. This is an image, a map of the Underground Railroad routes that cross through the state of Illinois, primarily from Missouri, going through Chicago, often up into Lake Michigan and into Canada. And so a lot of my research has found that a lot of the Black settlements have populated these routes, and a lot of the remaining African Americans that have immigrated this way, or excuse me, that have traveled this way still reside there today. And then also through another path that African Americans have used is through the Great Migration, primarily the first wave of the Great Migration. And so a lot of individuals have moved through East St. Louis and St. Louis all the way up to Chicago. And you see that represented in a lot of the data that comes out of the Census Bureau today. And so I want to talk a little bit about the farming practices here in the state of Illinois. Illinois is really known as the Corn Belt and Wheat Belt. In fact, the state of Illinois is number 2 in corn production and number 1 in soybean production. This is a map of the 1920 Yearbook in Agriculture that was published by the USDA. Prior to current time, the USDA had submitted a series of yearbooks that really captured the essence of farming across the United States, farming practices, different commodity crops and specialty crops. And so a lot of the maps that I'm showing now are coming from that Yearbook of Agriculture. And so once you superimpose that on top of this map, the farms operated by African-American tenants, what they call colored tenants, because this also includes non-white farmers, so Chinese, Japanese, and Mexican farmers, primarily out in the West Coast. The farms operated by colored tenants and croppers in the state of Illinois, each dot represents approximately 500 farms. So if you look at the state of Illinois, there's none. with the exception of the small cluster of farms, I should say, in Pulaski County and Alexander County, and that's in the southern parts of Illinois. And so part of my research now is to really start to break down that number. 500 farms is a really big number, and you can see a lot of farms that are operated by African Americans, primarily in the South. But we need a much finer comb to extrapolate a lot of that data. So some of my research right now is actually looking at scaling that number down from 250 farms to 100 farms to 50 to 25, 10. So then all of a sudden this map of Illinois becomes even more populated to really highlight the African American farms within the state. And so I wanted to share this table as well. This is from the 2017 U.S. Department of Agriculture about the number of farms that are primarily operated by a Black or African American producer, or the farms with a principal producer. And so the center column shows those number of farms. The three counties that pop up are Cook County, Kankakee, and Pulaski, and my filter was over 10 farms, so that I could begin to start in a place that had a little bit more data, because most of my research now has been trying to find those farms, and it is incredibly difficult to find farms throughout the state, and most of them are still doing those commodity crops of corn and soybeans. And so even on this chart, when we have Cook, Kankakee, and Pulaski County, I am omitting purposefully Cook County. That is the county where the city of Chicago is, and that's a primarily urban center. And my research is really focused on the rural landscapes and the rural farmers. I should also add, as landscape architects and designers, we primarily operate and design within the urban context. And so I'm taking a position of moving outside of that into the rural landscapes, because there's a lot of opportunities for practicing design and working and engaging with communities in these rural spaces that are often ignored and underserved. And so my focus is really to get to those rural counties and rural individuals. And so this 2020 census map identifies the populations by counties with the greatest percentage of African Americans. Through there, the three counties that show up are Kankakee, Madison, and Pulaski County. Pulaski and Kankakee County are the counties that also have the largest number of farms operated by African Americans, whether it is an employee or a principal producer. And this percentage is between 10 and 32%. So I'm finding that a lot of my work is happening in those three spaces. Madison County is a little bit different because there is one special farm that is a multi-generational farm outside of Alton, Illinois, which is right next to the Mississippi River, that I really need to go explore and interview the remaining farmer that's there. So these are also some of the larger Black settlements. So if you think about those two images that I shared previously, the African-American wave of migration and also the Underground Railroad, these counties and the population of African Americans there really overlap pretty clearly for a direct correlation between those. And so for today, I really wanted to focus on one township or one county in particular. This is Kankakee County. If you've ever flown over the state of Illinois or in the Midwest, this is primarily what it looks like. It's full of agricultural landscapes, and the different colors represent the different soil types and the different crops. And so this is pretty typical of the state of Illinois, but Kankakee County is very special, and I'll share a little bit more with that, what I mean particularly by that. I want to focus on this one particular township, Pembroke Township, that was actually founded by a slave that had moved through the Underground Railroad and settled here. Kankakee is about 60 miles south of Chicago, and this area is primarily for agriculture, but this particular area was undesirable for a lot of that commodity agriculture. So the land was cheap. And as we know in the United States, propertied individuals often had the most privileges. And so any ways that African Americans could get property was the best way to go. And so Pembroke Township was full of cheap land because it was not ideal for agriculture. But I will show some of the later findings and discoveries by a lot of residents of Chicago and the Nature Conservancy that really identified this place as being even more special. And so looking at this map here, this is a GIS map, looking at the different soil types. And I've highlighted that Pembroke again. And without knowing what those colors of what they mean in terms of soils, you can already see that there is kind of this like cylindrical whirlwind pattern of soils and colors that are matching. And that is indicative of this type of landscape that exists here. In fact, that type of landscape is a black oak savanna, which is one of the rarest landscapes within the entire United States. Black oak savanna is full of sandy soils and other kind of messy, scrubby spaces that have been identified as not ideal conditions for farming, but really great in terms of native and special ecosystems, unique ecosystems that are only found in this space. And so there has been a struggle right now with these farmers and organizations such as the Nature Conservancy, who have identified this particular area and has slated it for preservation. And they have been rather successful in preserving these lands because Pembroke and Kankakee County is one of the poorest counties in the state, with Pembroke being one of the poorest townships within the state of Illinois. And so because those farmers have often had land that has been passed down through generations by verbal agreements without actual papers or documentation, and those with documentation, there are many farmers here, many families here that have often gone delinquent in paying for taxes. And because of that delinquency, a lot of this land has been set up for auctions. And so people like our organizations like the Nature Conservancy and other individuals that are concerned about preservation of these unique landscapes have gone in and purchased lands. And so it becomes a really problematic entity because there's the need for preservation of these beautiful landscapes, but also the practice and how it was being done over time through delinquencies and through auctions. And so this is one of the images that I had come up with. This is the, just showing that and highlighting these beautiful landscapes of scrubby sand dunes, and then these oak savannas, and then the farms that actually reside in here on the left, Ayabo Farms, Basu Natural Farms, Black Oak Center for Sustainable Living. If you ever look up African-American farms in the state of Illinois, Black Oak Center is the one that primarily shows up. There's Boots and Saddle Riding Ranch and the Roy Thurman and Sons Farm. And there's a lot more that I've just not found yet. And I'm in the process of doing that. And so this aerial image here is just a representative of that beautiful landscape of different oak trees and also this scrubby lands. And so just highlighting just the beauty of this landscape. And so let's see, here we go. And then this topographical map through the Illinois Department of Natural Resources really highlights the landscapes as well through its contours and topography. And so all of that green is showing where the black oaks exist, with these little lines here that are talking about elevation change. So in the state of Illinois, it's mostly flat as you move further north into Chicago and up through Wisconsin. And so this topographical change is actually a really special feature within this area. And so my next steps are really to continue to investigate these farms and farmers, find out where they are, locate them, to do field investigations and photo documentation through aerial imagery and also through drone photography. My biggest part is to conduct interviews with these farms. And my most favorite part is to start looking into archival research of the cookbook collections of Blacks and African Americans. And I should say, there is a historically Black community college up in the city of Chicago that recently received a collection of over 1,700 cookbooks. This institute also has a culinary program, and in celebration of that collection, a lot of the students poured through those cookbooks and began cooking meals out of them. So they had a really great celebration using a lot of this information that's coming out. So I hope to get to that over the summer. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your questions at the end.
Okay. Starting off on the wrong foot already. All right. Hi, my name is LaToya Grace Sparks, and I am really thrilled to be here with you all today. For the longest time, I've dreamt about participating in this symposium. So to be here is I'm really happy about that. So there's already an introduction of me. So I'll just say that I was raised and I currently live in Richmond, Virginia, former capital of the Confederacy. And so that's why I'm here today to talk about what I think are landscapes of erasure and fragmentation and disruption. So to get us grounded, as well as myself, so I can calm my nerves, I will start with a quote. This is by Key Miller, and this is from his poem, "The Cartographer Tries to Draw a Map to Zion." The poem is written as a conversation between a European cartographer and a Rasta man, and it's a beautiful way of highlighting the flaws of maps within a Eurocentric lens. So one of my favorite quotes from this poem is, "Draw me a map of what you see, then I will draw you a map of what you never see. And guess me whose map will be bigger than whose." I must say that when I was taking classes on geography and maps, I hated it. It was so boring. But I think that was because I didn't necessarily see myself in the maps that were presented to my class. And I didn't necessarily see my story intertwined in those maps. So I think that all became a game changer or changed when I learned or discovered, I guess, GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and realized that I could draw my own maps. And a lot of what I do reflects oral histories that were passed down to me by my family members and memories that my dad is always sharing with me about his childhood in Richmond. So I'm guessing that this audience is knowledgeable of the redlining maps created by the Homeowners Loan Association. But as a refresher, the redlining maps were used primarily during the 1940s and 1950s, 60s, 50s. But anyway, they were used by real estate professionals, lenders, developers, and appraisers to assign grades to maps or to residential neighborhoods that reflected their mortgage security. So neighborhoods receiving the highest grade of A were often colored on the map, colored green on those maps, while those with the lowest grades were either red or yellow. Now, my introduction to these maps came when I was working at the University of Richmond, which has done a fantastic job through its digital scholarship lab making these maps accessible to everyone. So you can check out Digital Scholarship Lab, Mapping Inequality, and pull these maps up for yourself. But I will never forget being like the only Black person, or I was the only Black person in a room. And for whatever reason, the professor presenting on these maps focused on this area that I'm showing to you right now. And he read aloud this quote. This area is yellow largely because the school for white children is in the Negro area, and because the Negroes of the D area pass back and forth for access to Byrd Park, which lies west. So for those reasons, losses on property are being taken. So one, the school that the author is referring to is John B. Carey Elementary School. I have a picture of it in its original site. It would later become converted during the days of segregation to an all-Black school, which is where my dad, uncles, cousins attended during the period of the 1960s and 1970s. That history has been left out, and I am hoping, as I will share in my future steps, to correct that. But anyway, it was one of those moments. I guess I've often been in spaces where I'm the only Black person in the room when the issues of slavery and the Civil War come up. So I'm used to feeling uncomfortable and just sitting in that discomfort. But for me, hearing those remarks made me want to melt in my seat, because I knew of that path that people would cross to go back and forth to Byrd Park. I knew of that area because I spent a great deal of my childhood living there. And I had no idea that these comments that were very hurtful and painful were talking about people that I love. And so I think I decided then that I'm going to learn how to map and correct this narrative, because this should not be the only narrative available or out there about a space that I grew up in and what that means a lot to me. So within that yellow space on the previous map was this block, the 2200 block of Idlewood Avenue. So as I indicated, this would have been in the yellow part of the redlining map. This picture was taken during the 1960s. That dapper, so forgive the quality, it's an old picture. I'm trying to work on it, but we'll see. But anyway, the man in the black suit is my grandpa, Robert Gray, may he rest in peace. And the two kids in the pictures, the one in the red is my Uncle Marcus and my dad. And I'm thinking this is probably around Easter Sunday, because I think that's the only time they really took out the good suits and whatnot to get dressed. And my grandpa rarely went to church, so it must have been like a big deal. But because of the way that this land was appraised, and because it was Black people living in it, unfortunately, the space was declared blighted and slums. And so it was destroyed. Like, there were a few houses on this block and they no longer exist today. This is a picture of what that block looks like today. So first of all, my great-grandparents lived in that home. So I think my grandpa, dad, and uncle were visiting them that day. But the reason that my great-grandparents were given for this land being demolished and razed and eliminated was so that the land could be used for the construction of a school playground. As you can see, there is no playground. And so this is what and on top of that, my great-grandparents were moved into public housing right across the block from where their house used to live, or used to exist. So there was the dispossession or the taking of potential generational wealth. And then the very reason that they were given for having their property or home demolished never panned out. And so I can't imagine, and my great-grandparents took this with them to their grave. Like, when I visit them in their apartment, which was public housing, I didn't realize it was public housing at the time. So that came out more during family histories and oral histories and whatnot. But I guess I'd always wondered, like, why don't they live in a house? Like, I never asked that because I was young, and you learn to respect your elders, but it was something that no one talked about. And it wasn't until recently, when I started doing more of this investigative work and mapping, that more of my family members have been open and just telling me about this generational taking and trauma, and just you deal with it. And that was it, because that's the way it was. And that was that. So All of this led me to just do my own investigation into spaces in Richmond, which led to my capstone that I call Reconstructing Randolph. And these are more pictures of the demolition that took place in Randolph. So the Reconstructing project essentially was my love letter to my relatives and the extended family that lived in the West End of Richmond. You can check it out if you just Google Reconstructing Randolph project, you can pull it up. But a lot of my methodology included a deep digging into the archives, so looking at old maps, the topography and the landscape when it was still intact, and then what it looked like so I-95 was constructed in downtown Richmond in the 1940s, 50s. So that wiped out like the downtown area and Jackson Ward, which many people would call the Wall Street of the South. So that highway was extended during the period of the 1960s and 70s, and that's when it impacted my family members living in the West End. So just unraveling that history and like the planning processes that took place, the number of community meetings, the hundreds of people who showed up and were pleading to not have their homes and churches destroyed because they had seen that trauma and that destruction just a decade ago. So documenting that was really important to me. And so looking at old maps, because I'm a map nerd, and it helps to just see what a landscape looked like before it was disrupted. And then there are a lot of course, oral histories and interviews that I conducted. And so this is a word cloud of some of the words that came up when people think about Randolph or the West End. So a lot of that's documented in my capstone. But the one overarching or major theme that I had, like when it comes to Richmond, and Richmond is not alone in this, but often when it comes to progress and development, like Black land, Black spaces are always treated as disposable, as expendable, as malleable. It's just a history of dispossession and displacement. And it's like a collective trauma that a lot of us carry even till to this day. And I think it's just so important. And I've been so encouraged by the symposium because people are doing the hard work of exposing that, of that injustice. And also I think documentation helps as well, because if you have the receipts, it's kind of hard to disprove, what had happened. So these are example of pictures of structures that existed in Randolph prior to demolition and whatnot. I included this picture because that's of my so this is, and I forgot to mention, my great-grandparents, the one whose home was destroyed in the 1960s, this is where they lived in the 1950s when the first bout of urban renewal was taking place in Richmond. And this home that looks so nice and pretty was destroyed, converted into public housing. And so they moved further west thinking that they were safe, and they were not, because 10 years later, they would be in the same situation. So I'm not very design oriented. I haven't been blessed with that. So I've been kind of wrestling over like the best way to portray this in a modern way. And so this is definitely a work in progress, but I love using story maps because it's a wonderful way of integrating like geography and storytelling to make the map come to life and the space come to life. So I envision as my next steps, and this is what I'm working on, creating a Black Atlas of Richmond that can at least provide some documentation of spaces that existed before that no longer exist or have been just disrupted in a major way, and kind of helping people at least find like their geographical roots. Because I think that that's important. Like I honestly didn't feel like I had a place in Richmond because I never felt, I guess, rooted or grounded. But in doing this research and talking to people who have been displaced, but yet still remain in Richmond and still call Richmond home, like, I think it would be an injustice if I like didn't try my best to like make a case for why we belong there and why I think that more should be done as far as like addressing the horrific actions that took place in the past. So that was, so the previous figure was like a story map that I've been working on. And I hope essentially to recreate this map that I created of downtown Richmond. So this blue map is representative of 2,100 people and places. You can engage with it and zoom in and out, but it shows like at least somewhat of a representation of the people and places that existed in downtown Richmond before a highway went through it. And this is based on just an old city directory that I came across years ago. And I was like, oh, this is great. But there was a lot of talk, like just a few years ago, like developing in the downtown space. And what really irked me is that no one was talking about like the displacement that took place to create like this area that we're thinking about redeveloping, but like redevelopment happened in the 1970s, and a lot of people were impacted by that for the downtown Coliseum area. So anyway, so I am hoping with this project to recreate something like this, and also to contribute to the larger conversation of reparations. I was triggered by something, and so I just went off and blasted something on Twitter, but it allowed one of my friends who's a reporter started looking at my work and wrote about it. And it started, I hope, like a meaningful discussion about reparations, what is owed to people, and yeah, and just providing documentation to work towards something like that. So thank you so much for letting me share my work with you, and I look forward to your questions after that.
Hello, so my name is Aysha Ames. Thanks to the Lemon Project for having me, and for the great panel that's here with me, and the stories are just amazing. So I'm going to talk about the Georgetown slave sale and just how the untold stories sort of that go into truth and reconciliation. So first I'm going to talk about my ancestor stories that was on the sale, Jesuits, Georgetown slavery, and the lasting impact of slavery. But first, I just want to tell you how I came to this project. So many of us saw this article back in 2015 in the New York Times about how Georgetown had sold 272 slaves to basically maintain its existence. And the article went on to say that sale was worth today's equivalent is anywhere between $3.3 million and $7.5 million in selling 272 slaves down to plantations in southern Louisiana or in Louisiana. And at the end of that article, it said something like, if you have these surnames, you're from these parishes in Louisiana, your family's Black Catholic, you are likely a descendant. So I remember reading that article and saying, that's interesting. I didn't have any of the surnames, but my family is Black and Catholic, and my family's from that line of family. A portion of my line of family is from Southern Maryland. So I didn't think anything more of it until possibly a few months after that, a genealogist who was hired by an alumnus of Georgetown actually called one of my great aunts and said, we believe that you were descendants of that sale. And within that sale, it's actually the actual number is closer to possibly 300 slaves who were actually sold in that slave sale, but 272 now is the number that's sort of documented and around, so we're going with it. And here's how it starts. So we have at the top, we have Ignatius Butler Sr., who was married to Viviana Mahoney. They had about 15 children. Their eldest son, Nace Butler Jr., who was 19 at the time of the sale. So Nace actually is listed on the ship's manifest as a runaway. And he stayed behind in Maryland. So all of his siblings went, his extended family went, his parents went, and he stayed behind, likely hidden by some Jesuit priests. He later married Eliza Anna Gow, who was on a neighboring plantation, and that's really one of the motivations that we'll never know as to why he may have stayed behind. He had several children. You can see Nace is my third great grandfather. His father is my fourth great grandfather who went to Louisiana, and then here I am. I didn't put my mom at the very bottom, which you probably can't see now with the Zoom screen, but if you think about just why that story wasn't told. So it's not really that long ago, if you think about it, it's my grandmother's great-grandfather who stayed behind and who was from St. Mary's County. Her family moved to New Jersey when she was young, and to talking about Kelley's project. They moved in the late 19th, early 20th century to almost similar geographic area in agriculture, because they were all oystermen. So they moved from there on the Chesapeake to New Jersey, which to a town that became like one of the oyster capitals of the world. So just thinking about why we weren't told the story and sort of the trauma that goes with it. And I really thought it was important to kind of center my work on this, and also center my work on thinking about about the Jesuits and property rights. So to do that, I'm going to show you just the manifest of the Catherine Jackson. So this is the ship's manifest that I got from the Georgetown archives, which actually shows, you see the top, Nace Butler. So this is Nace Butler Sr. He's identified as 50. At the time, 5'9", his wife Viviana. And then later on the manifest further down, you actually see Nace actually on that ship of people who were sold to. So just to give about Nace. So Nace stayed in St. Mary's County. I have a picture of actually. I thought it plantations. He actually stayed here in St. Inigo's and stayed in St. Mary's County for his entire life. So what we know about Nace is that there isn't much in the records about him after that 1838 sale. He doesn't surface again until post-emancipation in 1864, and he's not listed. And he's not listed, but his wife is. His wife Eliza Ann is listed on a property submitted by the Langleys, by Charles Langley, Langley Air Force Base there, by the owners of the Langley, as actually restitution to the county for slaves that had been freed. So his wife and children were listed there. So that's how we know that's again when these surfaced. He surfaces later in the 1870s and census with him, his wife Eliza Ann, and children. But he goes on to become like a Republican delegate. He becomes a trustee of the church. He's the only, I believe, Black person who's buried in St. Inigo's, which is the longest held Jesuit property in the world, because the Jesuits at one point were ceased operation. So he's there, and he's quite prominent, and really be thinking about how that story never came to be. So going back to that, I'm going to go back to the Jesuits, Georgetown, and slavery. So if you look at these plantations, the Jesuits had about 12,000 acres in land, if you think about just quantity. And they really went on this, when they came with Lord Baltimore in the 1630s, they came as religiously oppressed. And that's usually the narrative that's told. However, what's really left out of that narrative is that they came as religiously oppressed, really rich people. So they came, so they were a religious minority. Many who came were members of, who came with Lord Baltimore to colonial Maryland, were members of the English gentry. And if you think about the English gentry and property rights, which is where I'm sort of centering my work, if you were in the English gentry, and most of you have seen Downton Abbey or something, if you were in the English gentry, if you were the male heir, the first male heir, the oldest, you took. So you took property. If you were that second son, you were pretty much out of luck. So what a lot of them did is that they would come to America to get those property rights that they could not get back in England. And they kept those same English property laws, thinking that they would transfer here. So when the Jesuits came, they received about 12,000 acres in land grants from Lord Baltimore, and they received that property in what's called in the law called fee simple absolute. So fee simple absolute means that if I give you something, you have it and can do anything you want with it, and they only had to pay any taxes or fees on it when they developed the land. And that's important too, because if someone gives you something and you don't have to do anything with it or pay anything on it, that's really valuable. So just thinking about what the Jesuits had and what they were given, and so to actually work that land, they eventually had, they first had Irish indentured servants. There were some property taxes imposed, and then sometime within their slavery, they really took to slavery. And they had several hundred slaves, and they received this property, as well as they'd also get property through other Catholics who were parishioners. So they would actually will them property. And one of the things that is sort of left out of the narrative is all this time that the Jesuits were doing this, they are kind of removing themselves from like the Maryland General Assembly. So they're not necessarily involved in the laws that are kind of centering around anti-Black. Because they see themselves as being on a mission. It is their mission to promote Catholicism. And within those laws, there are all the laws that we know, but there are also these that about like who's born as, like when you were born a slave. There are even laws on if you were a white woman who was free or not an indentured servant and you married someone who's Black, your children would be born into slavery, and then you went into indentured servitude for 7 years. So there were just all these types of anti-Black laws that were coming about that the Jesuits just didn't participate in. And they didn't participate because they really went by the guise that we are a religious minority. We just want you to just be here, not in the forefront, but they really did benefit from not being in the forefront. I mean, one of the ways they did is if we're talking about these thousands of acres of land, and if you think about property rights and just what we talked about earlier, if you have thousands of acres and you want profit and you need to develop that land, you need labor, and that labor, most of it were enslaved people. But if you think about how people and their parishioners would actually donate that land, if you are that second son, you know what you got if you didn't get land? You may have gotten the other forms of property, so slaves. But the problem is if you've got a few hundred acres of land and no slaves, you can't now do anything with that land. So the way that that shift that the Jesuits benefited from was these things happening together. So if you had land and slaves, that they actually go together. And I think that was big for them when they were inheriting from widows or like people who were also passing along their land to the Catholic Church, to the Jesuits. So they were able to amass a lot of land and a lot of people from these shifts in this landscape. And I think that really just shows that the narratives we're told about this, about that the Catholics were oppressed when they came, and they were the crown, with the English crown really wanted loyalty to the crown and not to a religion or to Catholicism or to Jesus. But the idea that the Jesuits viewed themselves as these moral stewards of their property, and all while treating their property and enslaving people, and thinking about how they even write about how they're enslaving people. For example, like they write about how like the types of conditions in which they keep their slaves. They write about that there's not enough food. They write about, they call them pickaninnies. They write about their slaves eating babies. All these types of things as these morally superior individuals, and sort of have reinforced that by not participating in the laws of the time but benefiting from them. And so if you think about how they benefit and were able to benefit from this view that they were being persecuted. The last thing I want to just talk about is just Georgetown's response to all of this. So in 2016, Georgetown, the president, LaToya, issued an official apology. It also named one of its buildings after Isaac Hawkins, one of his descendants was here earlier today, in memory of that first name. It's actually on the 1838 sale documents. Georgetown maintains many records, including like the Maryland State Archives and other documents related to Jesuit slaveholding. And this past weekend, last weekend, they actually established like a new center for memory and reconciliation. And I'm just thinking about how these things like, and what that means to descendants, what that means to the property landscape, just of law and how we look at it, and what and what things that have changed from England to America to here that are left out sort of in the property law conversation that we have today. Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's always an honor to be here at William and Mary sharing a history with like-minded individuals. I know that now that we seem to have shifted out of the pandemic a little bit, more and more people are coming and gathering at conferences and symposiums. So I was here last year and I'm very honored to be back this year. And it's so good to see so many more faces that are not covered in masks. And for those of you who are, I totally respect that decision because we are still grappling with the realities of the pandemic. And myself working primarily with an African-American community, I'm highly respectful of what they face and the realities facing African-Americans today, particularly in healthcare. And we see that a lot in Tennessee. And so what I am hoping to do is thread the pearls, so to speak, of what we have heard from my esteemed colleagues here to my right about why we do the work that we do and the restoration, the renewal and reconciliation that can come through telling not just the fuller story, but the whole story. And so I work for the Heritage Foundation of Williamson County. As Sarah said earlier, my name is Rachael Finch, and I spend the majority of my time working with communities across our county, but particularly the duplex community in southern Williamson County. It kind of straddles our county line of Williamson and Murray County, the south. But for the purposes of this conversation and where the Rosenwald School is located, it does sit in Spring Hill on the Williamson County side. If anybody has ever been to Williamson County, you will know that it's a very large county. The interstate cuts right through it, I-65. But once you get out of this townscapes and you really get into the county, you realize just how rural the county is, and the enormity and the immense history that we have that has yet to be told. And the story of the duplex community and the Lee Buckner Rosenwald School is definitely one of those stories. So we're going to begin by showing you a picture of what the school looks like currently. And then we're going to go back, because to understand where we are right now with what my organization is going to do in the next few months, we also have to go back well before the Civil War to understand the complexities and the collaboration that is now taking place with the Lee Buckner Rosenwald School. So what you see here on the screen is the Lee Buckner Rosenwald School, sits along the Duplex Road in rural Spring Hill. If you were to drive by it today, it would look just like an abandoned home. However, it tells a much more complex story than that. And it goes beyond just the Civil War, but into racial violence, into the trials and the triumphs of a community coming out of the Civil War and really creating churches, schools, and cemeteries, which become the nucleus of the African-American communities across the South, but particularly here in Williamson County. And so, as I mentioned, schools, churches, and cemeteries are all critical to the foundation of African-American communities. And we see that taking place with the establishment of Fisk, and then the normal central classes at Central Tennessee College, Tennessee Agricultural Institute, which is now TSU, and even Meharry College, which a lot of people know as Meharry Medical School. All of these schools are still very active and vital today as HBCUs, and they get their start in Nashville right after the Civil War. And many of the formerly enslaved within the duplex community are going to be significant advocates for seeing not only themselves, but their children and their grandchildren receive education. And that is what is really driving the work that we're doing with the Lee Buckner Rosenwald School, because most people that we have come in contact with over the past few years have no idea what a Rosenwald School is and what it really meant for communities across the Deep South, including our county. So in order to understand Lee Buckner Rosenwald School and how it comes to be, we not only had to go back into the archives and start digging into the research, but we had to also grapple with the memory of what most in the community thought that the school was about, particularly the white community. The name Lee Buckner sounds like two last names. It is. There's a white Lee family and a black Lee family, and a white Buckner family and a black Buckner family. So here we are working on breaking down what is the collective memory associated with the white community versus what is very well known with the black community. And talking with the white Lee descendants, they were adamant that it was their great grandfather that gave the land for the school to be built. It had nothing to do with the African American community. And that was not the case, particularly talking to the African American community of duplex. They said, no, we may bear the same, the same surnames, but that has nothing to do with the history as far as how we acquired the land and whose land it actually was. And so it was back to the archives we go to look for truth. To me, the archives are the best resources because facts are your friends. And when you have deed records that can back up those facts, it just makes it even more apparent that what someone has believed to be the truth for convenient amnesia to telling of history within communities that are very segregated and divided can be the conduit by which you can rewrite and redefine the cultural landscape of the community. So in 1867, Anderson Lee, Samuel Crow, and William Stevenson, three formerly enslaved men, now freed men, who purchased land from Guilford Dudley. They are purchasing about an acre of land to build a school that will also be the church. So it's going to become known as the Rural Hill Church and School. And within the deed, Guilford Dudley does give the trustees of the church the land, and it says for a church and colored school. So right there, we know that there was already, right after the Civil War, a church and a school intended fundamentally for not only religious practice, but also education. And this would be the first Freedmen Bureau school in this area for Williamson County in this, what is now incorporated Spring Hill. This is what the school looked like roughly about 1924 to 1925. It's the only known picture that we have. Fisk University has this in their collection. So it's a rudimentary log structure. It's not that fancy to look at, but to the African American community in duplex, it was everything. It was the center of their social life, religious life, and education. And this will become the Lee Buckner School that will also have ties to the Rosenwald School once it's built. And really quickly, I'm sure many of us in this room, if not all of us in this room, know all about Rosenwald and his relationship with Booker T. Washington. Rosenwald said that he was interested in America because he did not see how America could go ahead if part of its people are left behind. And we even see that playing out today across our country in many different divides, whether it is healthcare, education, the legal system, housing. We are still seeing his statement, being part of our conversation every day. And obviously his interest with Booker T. Washington forming this unique partnership to build thousands of schools across 15 states in the South meant a tremendous shift for African American school-age children to receive an education. Obviously, they needed to have 2 acres. It required contributions of cash and in-kind donations from the African-American community, as well as the white community, and then the Rosenwald Fund would match. Obviously, they would also be built using very progressive architectural designs that even white schools would then mimic. And of course, for about 20 years, they constructed nearly 5,000 schools. That did not even include the teacher homes and the industrial training buildings. But however, now 20 years later, the National Trust says that there's roughly only 10 to 12% that are left standing within those 15 states in the South. And within Williamson County, the only one that is standing is the Lee Buckner Rosenwald School. So our job at the Heritage Foundation was to determine how do we not only learn about the history of the Rosenwald School, but how do we incorporate this into a larger project greater than ourselves? And so what you see is the Rural Hill School, built 1867 to 1868. Picture, like I said, is 1924 to 25. And then the other black and white school is the Lee Buckner Rosenwald School, opening its doors in August of 1927. So clearly a different distinction of the progression and progress in architectural design, as well as the progressive nature of looking at the battery of windows, ensuring that students have the visibility to see, intentional directional positioning of facing north and south so the students could have access to all of that sunlight. There's no electricity out here in 1927.
Is it the same site?
It actually is very close to it. So they did not take down the Rural Hills School. That school stayed standing up until about the mid-1940s. And so what happened with this particular community is that as it grew and there were more children that were needing access to education, they added on an addition to the 1927 Rosenwald School in the mid-1940s. Prior to that addition, the Rural Hill Church and School, built in the 1860s, served for the lower grades. And then the Rosenwald School served for the upper grades till they added on the addition. So there was a big rural school movement, but I think it's really important to note that when we're looking at Middle Tennessee and its other 2 divisions in the East and the West, there are a lot of different factors at play in each community, each county. And Murray County, as I mentioned, is directly to the south. They were really progressive in building Rosenwald schools and getting the communities, black and white, to participate in fundraising and working with the Rosenwald Fund to put the funding together to build schools. Murray County had well over 15 schools, but by 1926, 26, we only had one, and it was in the city of Franklin, which is the county seat of Williamson. It was called the Franklin Training School. And there were plenty of the Rosenwald agents canvassing the area across the county, looking for communities to support the creation of Rosenwald schools. However, what we found in going through just an unbelievable catalog of research at the county archives, as well as the state library and archives, is that the reason why we only have 4 to 5 Rosenwalds in our county versus 15 or more in Murray County or other counties in our state was because of who was the superintendent of Williamson County at the time. His name was Fred Page, and he was very adamant that he was against putting rural schools across Williamson County. Now, Fred Page today has a high school and a middle school named for him. But at that time, he was very adamant about saying that he did not see a need for additional rural schools, particularly these progressive schools, to be built in the county. However, that didn't stop the Rosenwald agents from working with communities, and Lee Buckner will become the first rural Rosenwald school built in the county in 1927. And then, as I mentioned earlier, that, convenient amnesia of what the white community versus the Black community knew. It's amazing, though, again, facts are your friends. And here are the deed records that show that Francis and Monroe Lee. Monroe is the son of Anderson Lee, I mentioned earlier. So Monroe and Francis are landowners at this time, and they are the ones that deed 2 acres of the land to the Board of Education for $115 in 1925, so Lee Buckner can be built. Was this school and was the land given to the Black community by a white landowner? No, absolutely not. It was all by the Blackley family. So we're shifting the narrative. And even in 1927, they are rushing to build a school, and they're making sure that the Rosenwald agent can come and have it inspected before the doors open. And then here's the account book that even shows that Southall Brothers, an African-American construction company at that time, received $400 for building and supplying the lumber for the Rosenwald School. And here it is, opening the doors in August. Again, this comes from Fisk. And it educated children from August of 27 until it closed its doors with desegregation in Williamson County in 1965. So really quickly, these are the Rosenwald schools. So this is the Franklin Training School. This is Lee Buckner. Locust Ridge, this is very rural, very rocky community. And most of the land that you see these schools being built on is really poor land. Now, this school does not stand today, neither does the Brentwood School. We heard from our colleagues earlier about redlining and interstates going in. So Brentwood is an exceptionally wealthy community in Williamson County today. However, there was a very dynamic African-American community in Brentwood, and it was here in 1965 that Hartscuffle just disappeared because of the interstate coming in. So many of the things you heard my colleagues talk about earlier happened here in Williamson County as well, and the disappearance and the erasure of the school. And this is the Thompson Station School, which today by car would take you maybe 7 minutes to get to, but this was about 6-7 miles away from Lee Buckner going west. We don't have all of the documentation that when it comes to how many students were always in attendance each year. Some of those records are scant. So what you see here is what we've been able to acquire from our Williamson County archives and going through the Williamson County School Board records. So you can see though that they have large classes. And this picture is from Miss Georgia Harris. She's here in this picture. She's one of the little girls, and this is from 1948 up along the second edition side of Lee Buckner. Multiple teachers here as well. And going back to the foundation of those churches, schools, and cemeteries, these teachers are very much part of this community. Many of the teachers will be from Duplex or from Williamson County. They will go get an education at Fisk or what is now TSU, Tennessee Central College, and then they will come back and teach in these rural Rosenwald schools. Again, raising up another generation of educated children that then go off to college themselves and come back and serve that next generation. So with segregation, the county will consolidate. They will build Evergreen School here. So Westwood, Lee Buckner, and Thompson Station all become extended, as far as school goes. They shut their doors, they moved to Evergreen. This school is only in operation, integrated with white students until the mid-1970s, and it closed its doors. Today, it's abandoned. There's a big fence around it, and country music star Billy Ray Cyrus owns it. Or I should say, owns the property it sits on, and he has no plans to do anything with it today. State of Tennessee in 2018 surveyed all of the Rosenwald schools that were standing. So for our purposes, we're Middle Tennessee. And out of, the 122 that were built in Middle Tennessee, 25 are standing. And then they also did an archaeological survey around the school, and they found just, fragments of things that actually were from the time period of 27 to 65. So what's on the horizon for Lee Buckner? Well, nationally, we know that the U.S. Congress has passed legislation for the creation of a national historic park based on Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald schools. But locally, we are going to relocate the Lee Buckner School. The house and the land that the school and the land that it sits on is owned by Miss Hattie Baines. She is very aged, and she inherited the school from family who purchased the school in the late 60s, and they used it as a house up until the early 2000s. And then when they moved out, she took over the land and the Rosenwald School / house, and it's really just become her property. But she has sold the land And that requires us to either watch it fall down or relocate it to save it. So there are plenty of examples of relocating Rosenwald schools across the South to save them and turn them into community spaces. And that's pretty much what we are planning to do with it. But we also are working with the spatial equity stakeholders, our living alumni and the community descendants. We could not do this work without their partnership and the shared authority that comes with sharing this story. I would definitely not feel comfortable about just uprooting the school and moving it and trying to tell its story without the living alumni in partnership with us, as well as the Franklin Justice Equity Coalition, the African American Heritage Society of Williamson County, and also the Urban League of Middle Tennessee are all very much part of this conversation and how we move the story forward and telling the whole story. So our organization owns Franklin Grove Estate and Gardens, and this is where the school will be moved. It'll move to the front part of the property, as you can see there. And obviously, people have said all sorts of things of why would you move a school to a white neighborhood? What does Black history have to do with what used to be the Old Moore campus? And why would you not put it in a Black neighborhood in Franklin? You know, because people are like that. So I always say, tell me that I can't find something and I will. And so what we have done is do very deep research into the property at Franklin Grove. And we realize that it has significant ties, not only to female and male white education, but also Black education, because it was there that the first Freedmen Bureau school in Franklin was between 1865 and 1866, run by the American Missionary Association. And so we have studied the buildings. We can find enslaved fingerprints in the bricks. And then we're also working with the cultural landscape of the duplex community. And as I said earlier, the descendants and the living alumni to tell the full story, even tying in the cemetery history and the religious history of the property. The National Trust is very involved. My team is very involved. And as you can see, community partnerships, we've talked with students who have given us sketches of what they see, and it ties in very much with the work that we do. And we have done tremendous amounts of time with CAD and all of the drawings to ensure that the school will look as it appeared when the alumni remembered it as young students. Last year, we hosted its 95th anniversary on the grounds of Franklin Grove, and we had a lot of time talking with the alumni and really partnering with them and helping us learn more about their experiences in Williamson County and what it meant to be a student at a Rosenwald school at the height of segregation. And so one of the most proud projects that we're working on is a photographic exhibit of many of the living alumni whom you see here. And that exhibit will be on display this summer. And I cannot wait for that, and neither can they, because they are all excited about the school moving, because they know that it would be wonderful if it could stay in place. They also realize that moving it to Franklin, which is a big tourist destination, means that thousands of people each year will get to experience their history when Franklin Grove Estate and Gardens is open, because the Rosenwald School will become an African-American museum of history and culture, telling not only their stories, but the stories of African-Americans from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement. So this is what Franklin Grove will look like. The school will be right up here in the front, and it will be a wonderful place to really share that whole story of what it means to live in community and share our history together. So thank you.
Okay, we have 1 minute for questions. Now, I think we can we go over a little bit, Sarah?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, we can go over a little bit, so please, ask questions, ask away. Who would like to go first? No question?
I'll
Yeah.
go first. So, you mentioned in your, but you mentioned
LaToya
in your
Grace Park.
presentation about reparations. And I think many people have many different definitions about what that actually means in context. Can you speak to what you mean when you mention reparations to a institution?
Well, I was going to be frank. I would say giving back the land to people that the land was taken away from. That's at least one way that I would put it. I guess I like what Judge Thomas had to say yesterday, get the concept of equity that he brought up, but like, I guess we already have like on the books, like laws that address like this taking and stealing of property and how to adjudicate that or deal with that. So I think like, I mean, I guess we have a framework already for that, like as far as property being taken away and just and giving it back would be a first step.
There was a question in the back.
I'm sorry to the name of the woman Green. When you had the manuscript from the ship, were you able to go back further in your research to find out exactly where those people came from?
Interesting. So the actress asked Kathy Murkerson, like the Law and Order actor. That's what I remember her from. But she's actually a descendant as well. And Skip Gates did a Finding Your Roots on her, and he couldn't get any back any further than Nathan Giuliani either. So I was like, if Harvard researcher, yeah. Yeah. So no, so as far as, and I think part of it is just the ways in which slaves came to the Jesuits. You know, they came through kind of property holdings. They may not have been listed in wills. And yeah, so as far as how they got there, how all of them got there, we really don't have much record. But I'm sure there's still more research to be done.
Rich, does you know the last family that lived in the house, the Roosevelt School that was turned?
We do. It's here.
And they were aware of its history? Or were they?
Yes, they were all aware of its history. They knew it had been a school in, I feel like with Lee Buckner, I could do a whole college seminar class just on the school itself and the history to the community. And what's so fascinating about the students is, and their histories, is that they're all related. So they all knew the history. They all remembered going there when it was school, and then they remembered desegregation and the doors closing and then it becoming a house. And some of them can remember even going over and playing in the yard and when they put in a bathroom for the first time, and you know, all of the things that in a community, those stories are passed on, but yet within the white community in Williamson County, it was a story that was just brushed under the rug and no one really talked about it.
Other questions? Well, thank you. Please join me in thanking the. Can